This is an NBC News special report. America remembers 20 years later.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us in what is a somber and important day in America's history, the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. I'm Lester Holt here with Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb. We are in Lower Manhattan, overlooking the site where the Twin Towers once stood, a powerful memorial to the nearly 3,000 people who lost their lives that day.
And you see our vantage point. We're in the shadow of the Twin Towers. This is a day that family members of those lost vowed never to forget. And so they gather every year to remember, reflect, and mourn the loved ones who were taken too soon.
I was just thinking that everybody watching at this moment is remembering probably exactly where they were to, whether you lost someone or not. And this morning, we are going to honor the sacrifices of so many on this 20th anniversary. We're going to speak to family members of the brave heroes who ran toward that danger instead of running away.
And we are going to talk to two members of the Bush administration who realized 20 years ago today that America was at war.
We'll also, of course, take you live to the remembrance ceremonies that are being planned for this morning here at Ground Zero at the Pentagon in Washington and in that field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
In fact, President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden arrived just a short time ago at the 9/11 memorial. This, by the way, is the president's first stop this morning. He will also, of course, visit the memorial sites in Shanksville and the Pentagon.
It's going to be a moving morning, an important one, and we've got our correspondents fanned out across to bring it to you. Let's start with Craig Melvin. He's here with us at Ground Zero. Hi, Craig. Good morning.
Hey, Savannah, Hoda, Lester, good morning to all of you. We are just a few moments away from the start of the memorial events here in New York City. As you mentioned, President Biden and Dr. Joe Biden arriving just a few moments ago. We saw them from our vantage point here. They are going to be joining families of those who were lost on that day here some 20 years ago. Shortly here, the National Anthem will be sung. When that commemoration starts, that national anthem, of course, is going to be sung by the Young People's Chorus of New York. There will also be a procession by bagpipers and drummers. Throughout the ceremony, this entire city is going to pause in silence to mark those awful moments that we all remember some 20 years ago when those planes slammed into the towers. There will also be moments of silence here for the attack on the Pentagon and the crash in Shanksville as well. Throughout the morning here, the family members are going to be talking about their loved ones and honoring their memory by reading the names of those lost. President Biden, joined by former President Barack Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama is here as well. Others wishing to pay their respect on a day when the entire country is really going to pause and remember. And it has been noted by a number of folks this morning who were here 20 years ago. The weather that day and the weather today, almost identical. A perfectly blue sky and not a cloud in it. Savannah, Hoda, Lester, will send it back to you.
Craig, I have to tell you on that point, you guys were doing the Today Show earlier, and I walked out on this terrace and I shuddered because every September 11th, when the weather is like this, it is beautiful. You get this sense of dread. And I certainly felt it this morning.
Yeah, and even when you hear a plane fly over, which was such a weird feeling, I remember right after September 11th, it was so quiet. Whenever there was a plane, you were alarmed. And for some reason, sitting here, when a plane flew over, I sort of had those old feelings.
Yeah, you can't stop it. It just comes back.
So many of the family members that we've had, or the commissioner from the fire department, he was here, and just you get a shudder and a chill because to be in this very spot and to remember what happened, it would have been unthinkable for us to be where we are right now.
Almost every story begins with, it was such a beautiful day. And then it follows.
20 years ago, it was just a September morning, bright and pretty and full of hope. People arriving at work, ready to start their days. And of course, in an instant, everything changed. September 11th, 2001 began as a beautiful autumn day.
We're back at 8 o'clock on this Tuesday morning. It's the 11th day of September 2001.
Al, it is such a pretty morning, isn't it?
Perfect fall morning here.
That perfect morning came to a terrifying halt at 8:46 a.m.
We have a breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center.
Flight 11 had crashed into the World Trade Center's North Tower.
It's quite terrifying. I'm in shock right now. I heard a boom, looked up, and there was a big ball of fire. I'm stuttering because I'm in such shock. I've never seen anything like it. It's just horrible.
17 minutes later, Flight 175 hit the South Tower.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on this shot.
It literally blew itself into World Trade Center.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
As New York responded, President Bush, who was visiting a Florida school, was told by his chief of staff, Andy Card, America is under attack.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
The attack continued when Flight 77 flew into the Pentagon.
Apparently, it felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
We now have confirmed reports that a plane crashed into the Pentagon.
For the first time ever, the entire U.S. airspace was shut down. Nearly 5,000 planes ordered to land immediately at the nearest airport.
This country, in terms of air travel, has been immobilized.
The White House and Capitol were evacuated.
We're looking at the White House, Mick, because we are learning that there have been some evacuations from the White House.
Then, the unthinkable.
Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to clear this block.
The building has collapsed. That tower just came down.
These pictures are beyond belief.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be massive amounts of casualties.
At 10:03 a.m., a fourth plane, Flight 93, crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Another large plane crashed as well, just north of Somerset County Airport, 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
Get away from this area! Get inside the building!
Out of the area! And 102 minutes after the first plane struck the World Trade Center, the North Tower fell.
The other tower of the World Trade Center has just collapsed.
This is war. This is a declaration and an execution of an attack on the United States.
And I think that was the hardest nut of all, was for us to understand this was war. That this was, everything had changed. And one man who had a front row to the national response, Andy Card, he served as chief of staff for President George W. Bush at the time, as we saw, by the way, former President Clinton at the memorial. Andy, what do you think? 20 years, what comes to mind?
Well, first of all, I'm haunted by the images that come back to us, and I feel triply convicted to make sure that we don't let people forget what happened 20 years ago. And the emotion of the day is something that those of us who are older than 20 years old can relate to. But the younger generation doesn't understand it, and I think we have a responsibility to convey to them the magnitude of the introduction of fear to people who lived in the United States, something that we never thought we would have to deal with. So it's fear. But on that day, I was all business after we learned about the second attack. The first attack we thought was an accident. And then obviously the second attack meant that it was not a coincidence, it was not an accident, it wasn't a true attack.
Well, Andy, let's talk about it, because you were the chief of staff to the President of the United States. It started, I think you told him, it's going to be an easy day today, sir. He was going to go read to second graders in Florida. But while he was there, it was you who had this solemn duty to whisper in his ear, there has been another attack. America is under attack. Tell me about that moment.
Well, first of all, today is a glorious day. It was a perfect day 20 years ago. There wasn't a cloud in the lower 48. It was just a perfect day. And I did tell the president it was going to be an easy day. He was going out for a run with a reporter that he was afraid would beat him, and he beat the reporter, so he felt good. And then he was going to talk about his favorite topic, which was leaving no child behind in education at an elementary school and reading with second graders. So it was going to be a great day. He heard about a small twin-engine prop plane crashing into one of the towers at the World Trade Center and went into the classroom. And then I heard it wasn't a commercial; it was a commercial jetliner, not a small twin-engine plane. Then, oh my God, another plane! And I knew that I had to deliver that message. I was thoughtful about what I would say. I wanted to be efficient with my words. I didn't want to have a conversation with him. I presumed a boom microphone would be over him. And I just whispered in his ear, a second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. I believe that he digested what I said and became the president that day. The job was keeping his oath of office. It wasn't his agenda. It was keeping America's promise.
What was interesting to me, too, was the president said to you that he wanted to go back to D.C. He's like, let's take this plane back. And you had the task of, that was not going to happen. There was security at stake. So you guys had to do a lot of maneuvering before he wound up back in the nation's capital.
After he left the classroom, he went into a kind of a cafeteria/gymnasium and met with the crowd that had gathered there. And the first thing that he said out of his mouth, I'm sorry, I have to go back to Washington, D.C. And I'm thinking, he doesn't know we're going to Washington, D.C. We don't know where we're going yet. On the plane ride, he was so anxious to get there, and that's what we talked about.
We feel so
silent.
We're going to be hearing the national anthem here at the memorial in a moment, but as we prepare for that, remind us, you obviously knew a lot more than the rest of us. How big did you think this attack was going to unfold at that moment?
Well, our fear was that there were many other attacks coming. So, first of all, I thought that there would probably be 20,000 people in the World Trade Center towers. So when I heard about the attack on the towers, I said, that could be 20, 30,000 people dying right there.
Yeah, as I was mentioning, we're so lucky to have your perspective here as we watch, and we want to now join the ceremony that is just unfolding. And in a moment, as we saw the Stars and Stripes being brought in, we will hear the national anthem. It's being sung by the Young People's Chorus of New York City. Let's pause and listen.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, who from stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the
8:46 a.m., the exact moment American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And then there will be the annual reading of the names as loved ones are able to say the names of those they've lost.
The moment of silence we just shared marks the very moment 20 years ago that American Airlines Flight 11 flew into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. My name is Mike Lowe, and my daughter Sarah Elizabeth Lowe was a flight attendant on that plane. These 20 years have felt like both a long time and a short time, and as we recite the names of those we lost, my memory goes back to that terrible day when it felt like an evil specter had descended on our world. But it was also a time when many people acted above and beyond the ordinary. Beginning with the actions of the flight crews, like Sarah, and the passengers on the 4 flights, the individuals in the towers, the professionals of the fire and police, and later the volunteers who helped work on the pile sensitive to recovering our loved ones' remains. They helped pull us through the darkest days of our lives. In the last 20 years, my family and I have at times known unbearable sorrow and disbelief about the lives that would never be. Years we have filled with speaking out on my daughter's behalf and calling on many more precautions, and also for the history to be remembered not as numbers and a date, but the faces of ordinary people who looked a lot like Sarah. At the first memorial ceremony, my wife Bobby and I stood here with thousands of family members, right in the midst of a gray and black world of destroyed buildings. Today, this is a quiet place of memory. The gleaming 9/11 Museum holds a sacred repository for our loved ones' remains, and the still brightly stories of all the sons and daughters, the siblings, husbands and wives, grandparents, and friends. As we carry these 20 years forward, I find sustenance in a continuing appreciation for all of those who rose to be more than ordinary people, and a father's pride in his daughter's selfless acts in the last moments of her life, acting with heroic calm to help those in the air and those on the ground, a legacy from Sarah that burns like an eternal flame.
Gordon M. Amos Jr.,
Edelmiro Abad,
Marie Rose Abad, Andrew Anthony Abate.
Mike Lowe speaking on behalf of the families and noting these are not numbers, but these were people, ordinary people. And one of the things we reflect on today, people starting their day, getting their coffee, doing what people do on a business day morning. And their lives all intersect in these moments of tragedy.
Yeah, I think it's important to note on this day, I think a lot of people are watching TV and they're remembering where they were. And I like how we're just kind of letting these events play out. I mean, we're here, we're with you, and we're going along with you. But I feel like sometimes when on a day like today, I just like to reflect and remember. And I think it's a beautiful spot.
And we see that's what people are doing here in Ground Zero. We're also watching ceremonies that will unfold this morning at the Pentagon and also in that field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We plan to bring you those remembrances. It's extraordinary to see what's happening at this ceremony behind us. 3 former presidents sitting together, President Obama, former President Clinton, and President Biden right now. We continue to watch these, and this reading of the names, which has become tradition and takes hours upon hours, a reflection of just how many people were lost this morning. Happy to have Andy Card, former White House Chief of Staff, with us. And Andy, I mean, it's 20 years. We were just talking about your memories. They clearly etched in your heart. What's it like to be here on Ground Zero on a day like this?
It's very emotional. I know the names are being read here. This is not the only place the names are being read. In rural New Hampshire, Ringe, New Hampshire, in Cathedral of the Pines, they are gathered and reading the names the same way they will here. And there are many other places around this country, in fact around the world, where people are reflecting on the memories of those people that died innocently. They just were going about their business. Some people loaded onto a plane to go to Los Angeles to see their grandchildren. Some people were going to start a new job. Some were going to sell products. Some of them ended up being heroes that deserved the Medal of Honor because they said, let's roll. After saying a prayer, they rolled. And it just is overwhelming to me, but it is so important that we take this time to reflect and to remember and to be grateful for the service that so many other people gave as a result of this attack that answered the call to duty.
I want to ask you about the moment when President Bush went down on the pile with the firefighters, grabbed the bullhorn, and really spoke for, I think, what a lot of people wanted to hear at that moment.
It was completely a spontaneous event. This was not a scheduled event. There were no script. There was no teleprompter. And I went to the president and said, Mr. President, would you be willing to say something? And he said to me, do you think it's appropriate? And I said, if you think it's appropriate, it's appropriate. And he said, I'm willing to do it. And I asked the Secret Service if we could have the president get up on this crushed vehicle. And an agent jumped up on the vehicle and jumped up and down a few times, gave me the thumbs up. And then Karl Rove found a firefighter, Bob Beckwith. And Bob got up there and held the spot for the president. And Nina Bishop somehow found a bullhorn for the president. And the president went up there
well, the man in the crowd yelled, we can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
Yeah.
The president said, I can hear you, and the whole world will hear us. And I think it was one of the most dramatic, impromptu statements ever made by a leader. And it did cause us all then to give up our other labels and say, we're American.
That's what's so extraordinary about it. And I have to say, one of the aspects of this 20 years passing that does hurt your heart, because we did find that unity for a moment. And look, this was a country very divided after this divisive and controversial election. But in the days after, people just set aside those partisan labels. I'll never forget seeing the members of Congress walking out onto the steps of the Capitol, hand in hand, and singing.
Yeah, God bless America.
God bless America. And I just, you just hope that, God forbid, if anything like this were to happen again, that we would be able to find that unity.
Well, I pray that we can. We have to work at polishing our democracy all the time. On September 11th, it wasn't just people in America who said they were American. The British people stood up and said, we're American too. The French people said, we're American too. The German people said, we're American. The Japanese people. The world united, and the president called out and said, you're either with us or against us. And we should all stand together.
And as you look at these pictures, and you'll see it throughout the day, many of these people, there's the president wearing a mask, reminding us that as we observe this 20th anniversary, we're facing an even greater calamity that has taken many, many more lives. And, you know, the parallels are inescapable.
I agree with you. I want America. I want Americans to recognize that unity counts in a time of stress. The pandemic, by definition, is a time of great stress. Stop the vitriol, put on a mask.
We took off our shoes willingly after 9/11, an inconvenience for sure, but it was for our collective security. So yes, there are parallels, as Lester mentioned.
Well, America is worth being united for. And this is a time when our country screams out for unity. Individuals may say no, but this is a time for us to recognize it's for the country. It's really for the benefit of the country.
Andy, what do you think President Bush is thinking on this day? He's going to be in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
He and I exchanged very efficient text messages this morning. He's on his way to Shanksville, and he thanked me for being by his side that day. And I heard from a number of people I worked with at the White House. So this is a day that is seared in our memory, in our life experience. But I'm so grateful for the strength of leadership that President Bush demonstrated, not only that day, but in the hundreds of days that came afterwards. Because, you know, presidents take an oath, but they cannot keep their oath without other people keeping their oath to follow the command of the president. And that is a burden a president carries even long after they leave office.
I just want to point out something very quickly for those who've never been to the memorial here. Each pool, 2 pools, represent the footprint of the 2 towers, and the reading of the names is happening right now, but I invite you, if you were ever in New York, to take the time to walk around these pools and read the names yourself. They are strangers, but as you see them all there, you're reminded of how it could have been anyone on that day. And it's actually quite emotional just to take a walk.
It is. Andy, thank you for being with us.
Andy.
We'll be with you throughout the morning. We can't leave it here at Ground Zero because, of course, tributes are being held in Shanksville and at the Pentagon, where hijackers flew American Flight 77 into that building, killing 59 passengers and crew on board and 125 on the ground. It's where we find NBC's chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander, this morning. Peter, good morning to you.
Hey, Savannah, good morning to you. The commemorations you're seeing in New York will effectively repeat themselves here in Washington. Actually, Arlington, Virginia, just across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. should begin in the next moments or so. They'll be remembering those 184 lives lost, those on that flight and on the ground here at the Pentagon. But also today, they remember thousands more, the American service members who lost their lives in Afghanistan fighting the war on terror there. 13 of them, as we witnessed, killed within the last couple of weeks at the Kabul airport. Now, U.S. troops, of course, they have come home. But military officials here, they stress the need for Americans to stay vigilant, even as the nature of terror threats have changed. So is the way that we engage in that fight, no longer with boots on the ground, but drones on the sky, operations in cyberspace. Still, for all of those reasons, this day, it's very much a personal one here at the Pentagon. Shortly, we're going to hear from military leaders. We will pause for a moment of silence at 9:37, and taps will be played. Another powerful and poignant and, frankly, patriotic day as they unfurled a flag early this morning at the Pentagon. Savannah and Hoda.
All right, Peter Alexander will be with you and the services at the Pentagon as this morning goes on.
We are joined now by retired Lieutenant David Lim. Lieutenant Lim was an officer with the Port Authority Police Department explosive unit. He was trapped in the rubble when the North Tower collapsed. It is good to see you on this day as people walk up here onto our set. Of course, we're looking at the area behind us, and I just wondered what your reflections are on this morning.
Well, I had the opportunity, since I came a little early today. Apparently, nobody wants me to be late. I went down on the site and I saw some of my fellow officers, that some of which weren't. I don't think there were more than 4 or 5 when this happened. Wow. And one of the older officers introduced me, and one of them turned around and says, "I believe I saw you on the History Channel." And all of a sudden felt very old. But that being said, though, as far as my reflections, I think I'm reserving a lot of that for after this segment. I'm going to go down there. I've been authorized to be allowed on to the plaza, and I can reflect, over the names of my fellow officers, 37 of which were killed that day, of course, and all in one section. And I'll spend some time there and reflecting about how either quick or long 20 years seems. At sometimes, people ask me that question, how does it feel as far as time goes? And I tell them it depends on the moment. Like right now, it feels like yesterday, except for seeing those young fellows there, reminds me that I've moved on in my life. And I think that's partially important also. I think that it's important that we do move on in our life. When I was first coming out and speaking about this, I had an 8th grade child ask me, I'm afraid. Well, what am I going to do if they come and bomb my school? And I told them, you can't be afraid. If you're afraid, the terrorists win. And we don't want the terrorists to win. We have to move on with our lives and keep going forward. I think that's what I'm trying to do.
Dave, in about 2 minutes, we're going to have the moment of silence for when the second plane hit. You were in the South Tower.
No,
Your offices were.
Yeah, my office was.
And then you responded to the North Tower.
That's correct, sir. And
what did you encounter? You saw firefighters going up. You joined them.
Well, actually, to be honest, I was there first because I was actually assigned there. The firefighters responded there. I'm assigned to the World Trade Center. A lot of people don't realize that the Port Authority Police actually were assigned to the World Trade Center. We had other units respond from other commands, but we were assigned there. And the first thing I noticed was people exiting the building rapidly. So I made it a point to try to get up to the 44th floor of One World Trade Center to encourage people not to get on those express elevators because of the danger if one of the elevators go out of service and then you'd be trapped because it's a straight drop and pretty bad. So that was my initial plan to get up there.
We can't help but mention that you had a service dog, Cirrus, and you lost Cirrus, and I want to say that you were so careful in the early days, and I think it was so gentle. You didn't talk much about it because you didn't want to say a dog was more important than all those who had lost human lives. But let's take a moment for that dog you dearly loved.
Well, thank you for that, because it was one of the things that I learned, through friends and professional help. That said, I had to acknowledge the loss of my partner. And of course, I respect the loss of everybody that lost people.
Well, let's pause for a moment, Lieutenant, as we want to pause, as everyone does, for a moment of silence for Flight 175.
David W. Bernard.
May God bless our fallen brothers and sisters, their families, their friends, and their loved ones. He says, I'll see you in my dreams. The road is long and seeming without end. Days go on, but I'll remember you, my friend. And though you're gone, and my heart's been emptied, it seems, books that you read. And though my soul feels like it's been split at the seams, I'll see you in my dreams. I'll see you in my dreams. When all our summers have come to an end, I'll see you in my dreams. We'll meet and live and laugh again. I'll see you in my dreams. Yeah, up around the river bend, for death is not the end. 'Cause I'll see you in my dreams. I'll see you in my dreams. When all our summers have come to an end, I'll see you in my dreams. We'll meet and live and love again. I'll see you in my dreams. Yeah, up around the river bend, for death is not the end. And I'll see you in my dreams. You in my, I'll see you in my dreams.
A surprise performance from Bruce Springsteen was not on the published schedule. Obviously, someone with deep roots in New Jersey, a place that was heavily impacted by the attacks here.
Something about hearing a song when you're at your lowest point or when you're feeling all the feels. I was just actually looking at you, Mr. Lim, and I was wondering in that moment, he was singing the words, "I'll see you in my dreams."
Oh, it's one thing. One of the things that music does do is it does, touch my heart. Especially a song like that, and I don't know. I think it helps to bring us all together too, something like that. But I'm sorry. We were talking about Sirius, right?
We were talking about your dog Sirius for a moment.
And again, I appreciate that. As I was saying before, I've come to learn to accept my loss as almost as much as people have lost with some of their family members, of course. And I think it's important to remember that he was also a police officer, a police canine that was assigned to the Port Authority Police. And I hope that one day that the museum will deem it appropriate to put his name next to the other 37 officers that are up there on the memorial now.
Lieutenant Lim, will we honor Sirius this morning? There were many souls lost that day, and we revere them. Thank you for being here with us.
Matter of fact, I have a little something for everybody, little memorial cards. Pass that down, please. Thank you. And one for you, of course.
See if I can hold it up to the camera.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
That's actually the picture of our graduation the day we graduated the K-9 Academy. And this woman, Louise Krause, was good enough to make up these cards. We had a lot of K-9 friends in the world that sent heartfelt messages to me and to all the search and rescue dogs that worked afterwards. They actually sent little booties, tons of food, bones, dog toys, which we gave to all the rescue people, of course.
Yeah.
But I think it goes to show that people do recognize also all the losses of that day. And as one person in Alaska said to me, he says, I don't know anybody at the World Trade Center that was lost, but I've lost my dog, and I felt that for some reason.
He was your partner?
he was my partner.
All
That's
right.
one thing I have to remember.
David Lim, Lieutenant, thank you so much for sharing your story and being with us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And we continue to watch the ceremony that's unfolding here at the World Trade Center. They're reading the names of the lost. Here at the Pentagon, they're also having a ceremony to honor those who were fallen. And we want to turn to NBC's Peter Alexander, who is there for us. Peter, good morning.
Savannah, that's right. The powerful and patriotic commemorations began early this morning at sunrise as they unfurled a giant American flag here on the building. Now you can hear the ringing of the bells. The reading of the names begins here, expected to last for nearly a half an hour. 184 lives that were lost here, 59 of them who were on the flight, 125 of them on the ground here at the Pentagon. We're now just about a half an hour shy of when that plane finally struck here. And some of the stories that are being shared by those who were here on that day are just so powerful and personal. Like that of Nicole Doucette-Bayert, who says, when we felt and heard the impact of the plane and the explosion, we didn't believe that it was anything connected to what was happening in New York. Just sort of underscoring the fear, the chaos, and the confusion in those moments here. From Robert Hogue, he says, I recall being trapped inside our offices as the building burned around us. But there was also this sort of inspiring moment of community as the thousands who were here on that morning rushed together, many of them coming to help set up a makeshift triage area to try to look after those who had been injured, some of them badly wounded, badly scarred by the crash, badly burned, helping care for them in those moments. Later this afternoon, the President and the First Lady, they will arrive here at the Pentagon, the last of the 3 stops that they're going to make over the course of this day. But within the next hour or so, we do expect to hear from the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as well, telling personal stories about the loss here, not just on that day, but in the years since in the war on terror that followed. Savannah, Hoda, and Lester.
All right. Thank you, Peter, at the Pentagon for us.
And people are also gathering this morning in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at the crash site of United Flight 93. NBC senior national correspondent Tom Yamas is there. Tom, good morning to you.
Hey, Lester, good morning to you. You know, like so many special places around the world, the memorial here for Flight 93 is hard to get to, but it is worth the trip. Before this happened, there really was nothing out here in western rural Pennsylvania, but now there is this beautiful memorial, and it is starting to fill up today. They're expecting the biggest crowd they've ever had before, and I want to show you a portion of the memorial right now. This is called the Wall of Names, and it is 40 marble pillars that together form that wall, and they follow the path that Flight 93 took. They have the names of the people who died, the passengers and crew aboard that flight, the heroes, of course. And we were here last night as family members and friends were leaving flowers, they were leaving lanterns, they were touching the names, taking photos, some were wiping away tears. And we're expecting Vice President Kamala Harris here today to deliver the keynote address along with President George W. Bush as well. And President Biden will be here later today to pay his respects. And I had a chance to speak with a lot of the relatives, including Charlie Green. His father, Donald Green, was on the flight. He was only 10 years old when his dad died, and he said they've worked so hard for this moment right now, 20 years later, to have this memorial up and exactly the way they want it. They want to educate people, especially children, about what happened here, to tell the stories of their loved ones, about the heroes of Flight 93. I also spoke with someone named Gordon Felt. His brother, Edward Felt, was on the flight as well in Flight 93. And he said something that really shook me. He said, you know, before this happened, no one had ever thought that someone would hijack a plane and turn it into a missile. And yet our loved ones were on that plane and they fought back. So you have to ask yourself the question, what would you have done? Because we know what they did. They fought back. And for that, they are heroes. And we expect to hear about these heroes throughout the day today, during these special moments as we remember everyone from Flight 93. And you know, Flight 93's story is so unique because they had those airphones, Lester, and I know you had a chance to speak with a lot of the family members, but those airphones, they called from the plane down to their loved ones to tell them they were getting together and they were going to fight back. Guys, back to you.
Yeah, Tom, thank you. And one of the things we learned in the Dateline was that the passengers, they had planned to storm the cockpit, but they wanted to wait till the airplane was over a rural area because they were so selfless in their thinking. They didn't want, obviously, the plane to come down over a big city.
Yeah, it's astonishing how brave they were, but also how quickly they analyzed that situation with such little information and changed the course of that day for the better.
Yeah, we'll be back in just a moment as America remembers 20 years later.
choke point for this fire. And good evening from New Orleans. Nice to really spend some time with you. Appreciate
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism, but when the school board presented its plan, it ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory.
Racism in reverse. False narrative. Shame.
This is Southlake. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Will coronavirus come back next year?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. Man, you know a lot. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Right now on NBC News Now.
We begin with one giant leap forward in the space race.
Bezos making it very clear this is the first step of many to come.
Speaking out against laws that they feel would make it harder for Texas voters to cast their ballot. The issue here is not that vaccines aren't available. They say the issue is that people are choosing not to get vaccinated.
We have a team of correspondents covering this breaking story for us today.
This is NBC News Now, streaming free 24/7.
Today is now a podcast.
We have what you need to start your day, and it's available every day.
Your daily dose of news and interviews. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back now with our special coverage of the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. We're watching as the ceremonies unfold here in New York and also in Washington. Let's turn now to our colleague Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, just walk us through your recollections of that day 20 years ago.
Oh, Hoda, and especially being here at the Pentagon today, overwhelming sadness and awe at the courage, the resilience, the shock, of course, at what happened. Initially, the President of the United States thought it was a small plane hitting the first tower. And then, of course, after the second tower, we all knew we were in a massive terror event. And the first attack on the homeland in 200 years, in the continental homeland, and the most complex terror attack, was just such a shock. And as the 9/11 Commission reported afterwards, one of the huge takeaways was it was a lack of imagination. We had had hijackings overseas. We'd had bombings. We had stopped and prevented bombings. Our embassies had been bombed by Osama bin Laden and the USS Cole in '98 and in 2002. But no one had ever anticipated this kind of attack. And within 30 minutes, I was able to report that our best intelligence experts, the government felt that it was Osama bin Laden, because they saw back immediately with the shock of what was happening. They were telling me they could see that only Osama bin Laden, and we later learned Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, could have planned such a complex attack. But I think about the responders the firemen and police who ran up the stairs instead of out, all of the people who worked on the pile, John Field and John Stewart and all of those who've been working and are still working to try to save those from the toxic effects, the cancers that they are now just beginning to experience, because the response from our government has still been inadequate. And as you hear a plane overhead here, you realize that a flight could hit the Pentagon, and also, of course, the flight that went down in Shanksville because of the courage of those incredible passengers. So it was a failure of imagination. We never thought something like this could happen. And now, for all the people who work here in the building behind me to realize that after 20 years and multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, that the Taliban are back in charge in Afghanistan, and we still face threats of al-Qaeda embedded within the Taliban and the other networks still operating there.
And Andrea, I just think about being in Washington. I was there that day. I was a law student, actually. You were a correspondent, but there was such a panic, and I think people forget, now we have the advantage of looking back as history, but it was unfolding. People were terrified. They evacuated the White House. Staffers were running out. Capitol Hill. They evacuated Capitol Hill, and the police officers were telling people, just run for your lives. We did not know what was going to happen. No one knew the scope of this attack.
I mean, that was so much a part of it. They evacuated the State Department because of false rumors that there was a bomb in the parking garage. And so members of the Supreme Court, a very good friend of ours, Mike Leiter, of course, who ended up leading the Counterterrorism Center under 2 presidents, he was a clerk to Justice Breyer, and they were just told to get out. They didn't know what had happened. They were running. There was nobody really telling them, no authorities telling them what to do. Justice Breyer called him from India, where he was with Justice O'Connor giving lectures on American democracy, and was asking what is happening in America. So just, we had no way of knowing. And, you know, it was just a terrifying, horrifying experience for all of us.
Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, thank you so much. We're pausing for a moment. They've been reading the names of the victims in New York, and they're doing the same at the Pentagon. Let's take a quick listen in.
Chief Warrant Officer William R. Ruth, United States Army Reserve. Charles E. Sabin, Sr. Marjorie C. Salamoni. John P. Sammartino. Colonel David M. Scales, United States Army. Commander Robert A. Slagle, United States Navy.
The list is long.
Janice M. Scott.
The faces you see there on the left side at the Pentagon, the reading of the names, the same thing underway right now in New York City. I want to bring in NBC's political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, in the days and months, after the attacks, Americans came together to mourn and to heal. Now here we are 20 years later. I think we all understand it's a very different and very divided country, and I think a lot of our minds go back to the idea, if all this were to play out again today, would we handle it different? Would we react differently?
You know, Lester, it's obviously something we've all been thinking a lot about. And you know, what's ironic is right before 9/11, if you think about the political period we were in, we had a contested election that some people didn't think was decided fairly. We had just gone through a very divisive impeachment, and yet despite that political backdrop, 9/11 happens and we come together again around a president that half the country didn't fully believe at that time may have been elected on the up and up, and sure enough, we united. And so here we are 20 years later, in some ways in a similar environment. We have a new challenge with COVID, and yet we're not doing it. And Lester, about the only conclusion I can come to is this: as Americans, when our threat and our enemy is foreign, the Nazis, the Soviets, Al-Qaeda, we get in the foxhole together. When the threat is societal, racism, COVID, when it's invisible, we seem to divide. Maybe we can capture that spirit that we had there, but that seems to be the biggest difference between today and COVID and 2001 and Al-Qaeda.
You know, I've often wondered, are we living in a sense of perpetual fear since 9/11? I mean, we've watched the security apparatus, build up around us, getting our bags searched to go into a sporting event. Mm-hmm. Obviously, what we go through at airports, and you wonder how the fear factor has affected our politics and our lives going forward.
It's funny you say that. When people have been asking me about my memories of 9/11 here in this city, where I was, it is what I can't fully explain is the fear that began on September 12th. And the next, frankly, year, Lester, you remember this, it wasn't a matter of if Washington or New York was going to get attacked, it was simply when. And we all in the back of our heads wondered, what were we going to do? If we were on the subway, how would we handle it? And that, to me, is something that you can't really, you never get that back. I wonder, when you ask about the fear, I guess the good news is I have 2 kids, one almost an adult now, of course, born after 9/11, and all these security things that we look at and we can't believe what we have to do, go through these magnetometers to go through a baseball game. It's just commonplace for them. You know, it's why they're not fighting the masks, I think, of that generation and things. Unfortunately, it is normal for them. They don't know any different. You and I know that it was a time when we could go to the gate and hug somebody when they came off the plane. You can't do that today.
Yeah.
So I do think that part of it is something that does get lost for some of us that are older.
All right, Chuck, thanks.
We want to go back to the World Trade Center and listen in some of the names being read in honor.
Stephen Coakley.
They've been reading now for about 40 minutes.
Jeffrey Allen Cole.
Patricia A. Cody.
Daniel Michael Coffey.
Jason Matthew Coffey.
Florence G. Cohen.
Kevin S. Cohen.
Anthony Joseph Coladonato.
Mark Joseph Caleo.
Stephen J. Caleo.
Christopher Michael Colasanti.
Kevin Nathaniel Colbert.
Michelle P. Colbert.
Keith E. Coleman.
Scott Thomas Coleman.
Robert D. Colon.
Liam Joseph Calhoun.
Robert D. Jean Marie Collin.
Robert J. Call.
Joseph Kent Collison.
John Michael Collins.
Patricia Malia Kolodner.
Thomas Joseph Collins.
Sol E. Cohen.
Jeffrey Dwayne Coleman.
I'm done.
And my uncle, Brian Christopher Novotny, whose tie I am wearing today proudly.
And my aunts, Maria Teresa Concepcion Santillan and Judy Santillan Fernandez. Tita Maritas, from the pictures and stories I've heard and seen, I know how beautiful you were. After 20 years, you are now reunited with Lola and Lolo, who passed away last year. Please be our guardian angel. We will never forget, and we will always remember you. God bless America.
Two young men, too little to remember. They weren't born then.
Yeah.
And yet reading the names of loved ones at Ground Zero.
Yeah, there were the children who were not alive at that time, and they still feel that loss. That took me off guard, definitely. There's some beautiful music and some beautiful tributes today, and we want to let everything breathe today. We have the Military District of Washington Joint Chorus. They are planning to sing Amazing Grace at the Pentagon. Let's take a listen.
And now we'll hear an invocation, a prayer at the Pentagon.
I invite you to join me in prayer. Let us pray. Almighty God, we pause on this solemn anniversary with heavy hearts as we remember this horrific tragedy took place on the grounds of the Pentagon, taking from us 184 of nearly 3,000 sons and daughters of our nation that perished on this day. We especially remember the surviving families and friends and ask your continued healing of the grief that they bear each day. We celebrate these great American heroes who have laid such a supreme sacrifice onto the altar of freedom. And Lord, we ask that you bring them comfort to all survivors as our nation remembers their patriotism. Oh God, we also remember and offer thanks to those who served, delivered aid, delivered assistance, and even saved others in this time of tragedy and need. Lord, 20 years later, our prayer is that we unite together as a nation and embrace one another with dignity and respect for all, that we seek peaceful resolutions, and we learn to choose love over fear each day. And Lord, with your help, oh God, help us find hope and forgiveness in ourselves and in this world which we live, that we can make a difference to everyone around us. Lord, through your help, through your guidance, through your loving grace, we pray this in thy holy name. Amen. I now invite you to stand and join me in a moment of silence.
the moment of silence and the playing of taps marking the very moment, 9:37 a.m., that American Airlines Flight 77 was flown into the Pentagon, killing 52 passengers, 7 crew members aboard that airplane.
Such a moving ceremony. And let's bring in presidential historian Michael Beschelas. Michael, I mean, I feel like America's pain and resolve is all on display today. We're watching it happen. I just wonder where you think 9/11, just the impact of 9/11 20 years later.
I hate to say it, but we are living in a very different country. As our friend Chuck Todd was saying just a few moments ago, in the wake of 9/11, people behaved as they did after Pearl Harbor. The country, which had been divided over all sorts of issues, instantly united. Everyone was on the same side. This was a country where we were one family and one community. Alas, here we are 20 years later, and that is not the case. We've gone through a period where our government has taken us into 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many Americans to this day don't understand why we went or what the result was. We've had 2 economic calamities, 2008 and last year and this year during the pandemic. It's been a very hard time. It's a very divided country. One of the best things we can do today is try to recapture some of the ingredients of the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And for instance, we're looking at the Pentagon. We are only living in a city that is intact today because those heroes on that flight were able to divert that plane away. You know, that could have been a day in which planes hit the White House and the U.S. Capitol, would have been very different.
All that change.
Michael, I recall that day. I'd been on the air at MSNBC all day, and I stepped out that evening, and unmistakable sound of fighter jets flying over the building. And I remember thinking at that moment, my God, we're at war. We are at war. And then later I thought, the USS Cole had been hit, the embassy bombings, Al-Qaeda attacks. Why didn't we see it as a war before September 11th?
Because what was happening was something that is, alas, deep in the American tradition. A ship sunk in Havana Harbor, 1898. It was an accident. A lot of people said it was sabotaged by the Spanish. We conducted an almost worldwide war against Spain. In 1964, there was a rumor of a second attack in the Gulf of Tonkin on an American ship that had been provoking some North Vietnamese as well as doing things that were perfectly acceptable. The result was Congress voted for a war that lasted for 9 years. Americans understandably get upset when, things are done against our people and things are done against the general peace. But at the same time, there is a great tendency for us to rush to war. We did in Afghanistan. We removed the danger of al-Qaeda immediately. We're now asking the question this week and last week, was 20 years of war in Afghanistan with trillions of dollars and lives lost worth this effort to build a Greek democracy that perhaps was not going to happen?
Michael, will you pause with us just for a moment? I want to go to the World Trade Center where we're hearing a beautiful rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone. Let's listen in. With a moving rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone at the World Trade Center. We are monitoring simultaneous memorials reflecting the horror of that morning. planes hitting first the World Trade Center, then the Pentagon, then a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the names are being read, a process that takes literally hours here in New York because of the many, many lives that were lost that day. And I just want to say, Lester, when you mentioned walking out and hearing those fighter jets in the sky, it made me think, number one, of my brother, who was one of those fighter pilots doing those patrols that night, but also a word for our military. You know, we're talking about those lost on 9/11, but those who have given their lives in service in Afghanistan and Iraq.
How many young men and women went to recruiters and said, I want in, you know?
They did. They stood up and they said, I want to defend our country. And many of them have paid dearly with their lives or continue to pay. We're going to pause right here. We'll continue our coverage. In a moment, we'll begin a ceremony in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And we will watch all of this as America remembers a solemn day in our history, 9/11, 2001, 20 years later. We'll be back right after these messages.
Jose Nicholas DePena.
Robert John Devaney.
Michael Durienzo.
David Paul DeRubio.
Jamal Leguez DeSantis.
This is a critical choke point for this fire.
And good evening from New Orleans. Nice to really spend some time with you. Appreciate
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism, but when the school board presented its plan, it ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory.
Racism in reverse. False narrative. Shame.
This is Southlake. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Will coronavirus come back next year?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. Man, you know a lot. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Right now on NBC News Now.
We begin with one giant leap forward in the space race.
Bezos making it very clear this is the first step of many to come.
Speaking out against laws that they feel would make it harder for Texas voters to cast their ballot. The issue here is not that vaccines aren't available. They say the issue is that people are choosing not to get vaccinated.
We have a team of correspondents covering this breaking story for us today.
This is NBC News Now, streaming free 24/7.
Today is now a podcast.
We have what you need to start your day, and it's available every day.
Your daily dose of news and interviews. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
This anniversary being memorialized in so many parts of the country, and of course Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where United Flight 93 went down. Our Craig Melvin right now is here in New York above the memorial taking place here. Craig?
Hey, Lester. Good morning to you once again as we take a look at the ceremony there in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. President Biden just leaving this ceremony here at World Trade Center. He is headed for Shanksville to pay his respects and lay a wreath there, where, of course, Flight 93 crashed in that remote area 20 years ago today. I had the opportunity to spend some time there in Shanksville on yesterday. This is the video, of course, of President Biden and First Lady Dr. Joe Biden leaving this ceremony just a few moments ago before they make their way there to Pennsylvania. But you know, it's, and I said this yesterday, Lester, it's that memorial in Shanksville, so thoughtful in the literal sense in terms of how it was designed, and the fact that they were able to create this overlook there at the end of the flight path. And of course, there's that giant boulder that marks the site of where those true heroes crashed that plane 20 years ago this morning. Of course, now we know that plane was bound for either the U.S. Capitol or the White House. But the folks who were on that plane 20 years ago this morning who took a vote, remember, They stood up in the cabin of that plane and took a vote, that plane that was headed from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. And they decided in a matter of minutes that they were going to try and overtake the hijackers. As we watch the family members there pay tribute to their fallen loved ones there in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Lester, Savannah.
All right, Craig, thanks very much. We had Andy Card on, the Chief of Staff for President George W. Bush at the time of the attacks. He, in that famous picture, of course, is seen telling, the president of what's happened. But the president at that point knew there had been the first plane hit because Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor, had told him, again, the thought that maybe an accident occurred in New York and they were monitoring it. I spent some time with her yesterday in a two-way interview to talk about her thoughts of that day 20 years later. Well, Secretary Rice, looking at where we are today, is this where you imagine we would have been 20 years after 9/11?
I really thought 20 years after 9/11, we would likely to have experienced another major attack. I will tell you that on September 12th, I would not have given you anything that it wasn't going to happen again. But I'm grateful because I do believe that we used the 20 years well to degrade their capabilities, especially that highly disciplined organization that did 9/11. We used the time well to build counterterrorism capabilities in other places, and we used the time well to become a more vigilant and well-organized intelligence operation at home.
And there would be more threats, of course, but we also saw in those 20 years this incredible security apparatus grow up around us. We get search going into the ball game, into theaters. We know, of course, about the TSA and Homeland Security. Are we more afraid as a people than we were 20 years ago?
We are more aware as a people. We had a kind of false sense of security, and so I would think now we have an appropriate sense of what can happen. When I want to tell my 19-year-old students who were not born at the time of 9/11 what it's like, I just say to them, the way that you go through an airport today is a direct relationship, a direct result of what happened on September 11th. I think we're safer, but not yet safe.
Do you think that even with the Taliban in power in Afghanistan, that we are at less risk of an attack on the scale of what happened here?
We're at less risk, I believe, because we have the way that we share intelligence, for instance, between the FBI and the CIA now, is more likely to let us see something coming in ways that we couldn't on September 10th. But I do worry with the Taliban back in power and with their well-known integration or collaboration with al-Qaeda, that al-Qaeda could rebuild that highly disciplined organization that has territory on which it can train and from which it can plot and plan. We're going to have to work awfully hard with no eyes and ears on the ground, no intelligence assets on the ground. We're going to have to work awfully hard to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And I don't think that it's necessarily even within our power, because the Taliban will decide how closely associated it becomes with al-Qaeda.
You have acknowledged that by virtue of the fact there was attack, that there wasn't enough done to prevent something like that. Can you tell me that your thought process across the 20 years as you review what you knew, what the government knew, what it was able to do?
In retrospect, whether it was 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or any other attack, you can always look back and put the picture together in a different way and say, oh, that meant that something was about to happen. I'm convinced intellectually that we did everything that we knew to do, given what we knew at the time. But on a personal level, 2,997 souls were taken on that day. And if you were in a position of authority, you feel remorse for that. Because by definition, we weren't able to do enough. We weren't able to stop the attack. But it makes you, if anything, more resolute that it's not going to happen again on your watch.
And take me into that day for a moment. You're National Security Advisor. You hear about the plane crash. You report to the president a plane has crashed into the North Tower here. What kicked in? Can you tell me what the priorities were and what the atmosphere was as you all worked this terror attack?
Well, once the second plane entered the World Trade Center, and then we knew that the Pentagon had hit, now you believe that every plane is potentially a missile. You don't know how many of them are in the air. We now know that Flight 73 of those brave passengers was probably headed for the U.S. Capitol. And so immediately you're trying to gather information, but I had to do a couple of things. I had to get in touch with President Putin in Russia, because our forces were going up on alert. You didn't want Russian forces to start reacting because we're both nuclear powers. And I talked to him, and Lester, he said, yes, we know your forces are going on alert. Ours are coming down. And I remember thinking the Cold War really is over. And we had to get word out to every post in the world that the United States of America had not been decapitated, because the pictures were awful. We couldn't speak. The vice president and I were in a bunker. The president was trying to get to a safe location from Florida. But one of the hardest was hearing the vice president ask the president of the United States, should the Air Force shoot down any airplane that is not responding properly? And then thinking for an awful few minutes that actually we had shot down Flight 93, because after all, that order had been given, and thinking to myself that that was a terrible Hobson choice for a president of the United States to have to make.
George Bush was in the early months of his presidency. How did he change as a leader after what happened that day?
No president really comes into the presidency of the United States to be a wartime leader. And on that day, he became a president who had to lead a nation at war. And I saw him, he was always a resolute person, but now it was resolute in a different way, to be appropriately assuring to the American people when necessary, but to be very clear to our enemies that they were not going to prevail.
Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, again, National Security Advisor at the time. One of the things I found most fascinating was how important it was to get the signal out that, yes, we've been attacked and we've been hurt, but we're still functioning as a government, because, you know, think of the signals that were being sent across the world at that moment.
And former National Security Advisor Rice and Andy Card, who was here, talk about that moment aboard Air Force One. Andy Card said where President Bush received a call from Vice President Cheney seeking authorization in the midst of all this happening to be for our F-16s to shoot down a commercial airliner if the need arose, and President Bush saying, I was a military pilot. I could have gotten that order, and just the horror of that. Yes, he gave the authorization, but just imagine that. We want to go back to the Pentagon. This Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, we expect to be speaking. Oh, he is speaking. Let's take a listen.
And ladies and gentlemen, we must be tireless guardians of our ideals as well as our security, because we cannot have one without the other. Let me thank again the families of the loved ones and survivors for all that you have given and for the inspiration that you provide. The hallways that we tread were the ones that so many of them walked. It will always be our duty to fulfill their missions and to live up to their goodness and to stand guard over this democracy. We still work here. We still remember here. And we still uphold our values here. With clear heads and fearless hearts. Thank you, and may God protect the United States of America.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for God Bless America.
Stand beside
from the Pentagon to New York City, where a moment of silence will now be observed the moment the South Tower collapsed. Adoration, performed by Randall Gooseby and Zhu Wang at the Memorial 9/11 Ground Zero, marking a moment of silence for when the South Tower collapsed, and now to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, a moment of silence for when Flight 93 crashed.
My dad, Donald Freeman Green.
My sister, Linda Christine Grunland. my beloved brother and son, Richard Jerry Guadagno.
My brother-in-law, First Officer Leroy Homer, Jr. Toshia Kuga.
After the moment of silence marking the moment that United Flight 93 plunged into the ground, the heroic passengers preventing the hijackers from completing their mission of that plane going to Washington, D.C. And as we hear these moments of silence and bells now, it compresses the day and takes us into the moment of how rapidly events unfolded on that day 20 years ago. Tom Llamas, NBC senior national correspondent, is in Shanksville with more of what's happening there. Tom?
Hey, Lester, good morning again. That's right. We are watching as they read the names aloud of the passengers and crew and then ring a bell for each of the 40 who died on 9/11. In about 30 minutes or less, we will also hear from President George W. Bush, who's coming here to deliver remarks here on this hallowed ground near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, a rural area in western PA that really there was nothing around here, just farmland and ranches, if you will, and now they've built this incredible national park infrastructure so people can come and visit this memorial because this is so big for the families. They want to make sure no one ever forgets. And Craig was talking about this earlier, but this is such a special park because you have the memorial where you have the 40 names. It's called the Wall of Names. It follows the final flight path of United 93, but then there's this giant boulder, and it sits over the impact zone, and the only people allowed to walk and to make that walk are the family members. They're the only people allowed. They can come here anytime they want and they can do that walk. And I was speaking to relatives yesterday and they were telling me how much time it's taken to build this memorial, how much effort it's taken. They said in the beginning years, they could still go out to the trees and they would pick up debris from Flight 93 and they would bring it back to their homes because it tied them to their loved ones. It was all they had in many regards. Now there's a museum here where some artifacts are there and they tell the story of 93. And again, they can't stress this enough. They want to educate people, especially children, about the heroes of Flight 93. And it's funny, Lester, you mentioned earlier about how when you walk out to the 9/11 memorial, you see all the names and they are strangers. And yet they're strangers, but you also feel like you know some of them because you remember the last names, Beamer and Burnett here on Flight 93, and Sandy Bradshaw. She was one of the flight attendants who said she was going to boil that water, telling her husband when they were going to take on the hijackers. And when you do research and you read about the stories, you hear these little things that they make you want to cry. You hear about all the dads that were on this flight that decided to take an earlier flight to go see their families, and they ended up on Flight 93 on that 8 a.m. flight out of Newark headed to San Francisco. And because they did that gesture for that family, they unfortunately were in the worst position possible. But when you talk to the families, and I was honest with them, I said, listen, I've been doing all this reading and this research, and you sort of relive the moments, you get really sad, but then you start to get angry, and they all stop me and they say, listen, we can't live in that moment anymore. We're beyond that. What we want to do is we want to honor these people. We want to remember what they did. We want people to never forget that these were the first warriors in the war on terror. And I said it earlier, but it really is like when this happened, this was so new. No hijacker had ever turned a plane into a missile. Hijackers had either gone to other countries or demanded ransoms or in some cases parachuted out of planes. But to use them as weapons had never been done. And yet this group of passengers and crew had the foresight to know what was going to happen, to know things weren't right, that they were turning around, possibly heading to Washington, D.C., and they took over that plane and they were able to save what many people estimate to be thousands more by crashing here in Pennsylvania. Lester?
And Tom, thank you. And in my 40-some-odd years in this business, the one thing that's always struck me, and I've said it time and time again, is we don't know what we are capable of until we are thrust and tested in a situation. We've all covered so many stories where you've just been in awe of what someone has done, and none of us knows what would have happened on that plane if we'd been on there.
Let's continue to listen, I think, because, these are names that we should hear.
20 years ago, the world watched in horror as a terrorist
Q or something? Okay. Jeffrey Brian Gardner.
Thomas A. Gardner.
William Arthur Gardner.
Frank Garfey.
Rocco Nino Gargano.
James M. Gartenberg.
Matthew David Garvey.
Bruce Gary.
Boyd Allen Gatton.
Donald Richard Gavigan, Jr.
Peter Allen Gay.
Terrence D. Gazzani.
Gary Paul Guidel.
Paul Hamilton Geyer.
Julie M. Geis.
Paul Gerard Gelinas.
Stephen Paul Geller.
Howard G. Gelling, Jr.
And Jenna Bush Hager. And Jenna, I'm just going to say, you just walked out on the set here with Andy, and you have tears in your eyes, and I know you've just seen Andy. Will you share just a little bit about what happened?
Well, we just had a little bit of a moment when Andy had we had the privilege of working with Andy when I was a 19-year-old college kid who... and Andy had to sometimes reprimand me for some bad behavior. and I just said to Andy, I showed him a picture of my little boy, and I said, can you believe it? It feels like just yesterday I was the little kid who was getting into trouble. Yeah. And he said, I'm sorry I had to do that. I was just trying to protect you. Oh. I wasn't going to share that story.
But, I think a lot of people do wonder, Jenna, about you on that particular day, because we all knew exactly where we were. I know you were in college, but take us through what happened to you on that day.
Yeah, I was in college at the University of Texas, and before then, and Andy knows this well, Barbara and I were a little nervous about being the kids of presidents. There's no guidebook, and as y'all know very well, we're not perfect. And so we had an agreement that the Secret Service would stay back and we wouldn't really see them, although you could see sort of men with fanny packs walking at the University of Texas. And that day there were a lot of men in our backyard, and we knew that something had changed forever. And Barbara always talks about one of the things that many people don't know is that the Secret Service headquarters was in one of the towers. And Barbara was in New Haven, Connecticut at Yale, and they were all in a basement together. And everybody was just trying to contact their family and their friends who they were afraid about their well-being. And Barbara said, in that moment, they became my brothers. That the shared humanity, and I think we all felt that. So many people remember where we were because that day was a day that united us in the darkest time.
When you think about it, I mean, your father was president, but I'm sure you too were worried about him. Andy knows he was there. They raced him onto Air Force One with the engines running. And he was in the air, and it was all so uncertain. And were you afraid? I mean, afraid for a country. I know you cared so deeply for that. But were you afraid for your dad and your mom?
I mean, no, because the Secret Service are just extraordinary, as Andy can to attest to. And I knew they were safe. I was sad for everybody else. But that night they did get evacuated. They thought a plane was coming at the White House, and they had begged my parents to go down and stay in a bunker. And my parents walked down and they said, nobody has slept on this bed since Roosevelt. We're not sleeping here. I need to get sleep. I have a lot to do tomorrow.
Did you worry about the burden that your father was inheriting at that moment, becoming a wartime president?
I knew he didn't want to be a wartime president. I knew that about him. I know my dad is a man, and I knew that as sure as I know anything. But no, I mean, I was a 19-year-old college kid. I didn't know the implications of what was to come. But that night, they got the Secret Service ran in and said, it's time to go. That plane is headed towards the White House.
Wow.
And my mom said, my mom wears contacts. She said, I can't see. And she said, I'm not going without our cat Willard. Oh. So she found the cat. They carried Bernie.
That's true.
Yeah.
And my dad, you tell.
Well, they came down into the bunker, and they were both wearing robes and very silly slippers, carrying pets, and Laura did not have her contacts in, so it was bizarre. And they went into a nice little room with a bed in it. I was assigned a steel cot.
Andy, will you stay with us for just a second? Jenna, you too. We just have to take a real quick break, and we're going to come back, and we want to hear more about that day when we come back.
We await your father's speech and that holy ground of Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We'll be back with that and more just after this.
This is a critical choke point for this fire. And good evening from New Orleans. Nice to really spend some time with you. Appreciate
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism, but when the school board presented its plan, it ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory.
Racism in reverse. False narrative. Shame.
This is Southlake. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Will coronavirus come back next year?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. Man, you know a lot. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Right now on NBC News Now.
We begin with one giant leap forward in the space race.
Bezos making it very clear this is the first step of many to come.
Speaking out against laws that they feel would make it harder for Texas voters to cast their ballot. The issue here is not that vaccines aren't available. They say the issue is that people are choosing not to get vaccinated.
We have a team of correspondents covering this breaking story for us today.
This is NBC News Now, streaming free 24/7.
Today is now a podcast.
We have what you need to start your day, and it's available every day.
Your daily dose of news and interviews. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back on a solemn Saturday morning, September 11th, 2021, 20 years since that fateful day that changed everything in America and the world. And President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden are making their way now from New York to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It'll be the second of 3 stops today. They'll visit each of the sites of tragedy that unfolded. They're now on their way to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and we are keeping our eye on the ceremony there. We await remarks from Vice President Kamala Harris, as well as former President George W. Bush, who will be the keynote speaker in Shanksville today. And we're so fortunate to have 2 people who know him very well. And we won't make a race to who knows him better, but we have Jenna Bush Hager, his daughter, the first daughter on that day, and Andy Card, the White House Chief of Staff, who now, of course, we cannot forget, was the one to first whisper in the president's ear, America is under attack. Jenna, I never asked you to spill secrets about your dad and something so dear, but I just wonder what you as a daughter, how you reflect on how it changed him and how he thinks about 9/11. It's with all of us and so much with him. I know it personally, of how he cares for the warriors who served in the wars that arose out of 9/11.
I mean, that changed all of us, and it changed him. There was one time in college, and you may remember this, Andy, when we were all having dinner as a family, and Barbara and I were ribbing him like we like to do, and usually he likes it too. Yeah. But this day, he didn't, and he got up and he left the table, and it almost looked like he had tears in his eyes. And my mom said, "Y'all need to apologize to Dad. He just found out a helicopter was shot down, and that And there were moments like that where he, was changed forever. And I know it's hard to even think about.
Yeah, took everything really personally, it sounds like. Andy, this is a moment we're waiting for the former president to speak in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. What sorts of words do you think he's going to offer today?
Every one of us is suffering from PTSD today.
Yeah.
But the president carries more burdens than all of us because he knows that he needed help keeping his oath. His oath he took to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, us. But he couldn't keep that oath if it weren't for others that would keep their oath to make sacrifices for this country. And so that's a burden that you carry even when you're no longer president. So he carries the burden of having to say thank you to those people who made sacrifices that he would never invite on anyone. But those sacrifices were necessary in order for us to have a safe nation.
And America was calling for immediate justice. Was there a roadmap for if something like this happened, how we would respond?
I'm sure the Pentagon would say they have roadmaps. I found that some of the maps were a little old and stale. But
more Cold War oriented.
Yes. But remember, this was an attack not from a nation state. All of the rules of war are written for nation states. They signed the Geneva Convention. Terrorists don't. So they played by no rules, and we played by all the rules. And that's the asymmetrical challenge you have in dealing with terrorists, that they don't comply with even rules of decency or respect. They don't respect the prisoners that they take. They don't comply with the obligations to be part of a diplomatic effort to solve a problem. They just want to introduce fear and generate, I'm going to say, disruptions and rancor, and they just don't want us to get along. And so that's the big challenge. And this was the first time the United States was attacked by a non-nation state that doesn't play by the rules.
There were so many indelible moments that they're unforgettable. One of them was when your father was just down there. We talked about it with Andy, standing on the pile of rubble and shouting to the first responders, "I hear you, I hear you." Another is the memorial service a few days afterwards when your grandfather, former President Bush, was there, and what that meant to your dad to have his father there, and as a comfort, but also as a former president who had faced those burdens.
That was that photo, I think we can remember it, is so moving to me, to our family personally, because there's a protocol to how you sit. That's why Mrs. Obama and my dad have become such good friends, because they sit next to each other at funerals and such. So he wasn't supposed to be sitting next to my grandpa, and when he got up to speak, President Clinton said, "Do you want me to move?" So that they could sit together, and then they sat and held hands.
Well, we will continue to mark and remember, and yes, there will be tears, and we want to go to Peter Alexander, who's at the Pentagon. The ceremony is going on, and we've been talking about the Secret Service agents who protected Jenna that day, and President Bush, and Andy, and so many people who suffered their own losses. And Peter, I know you've got more about that.
Yeah, Savannah, that's exactly right. This week I sat down with 3 agents at Secret Service headquarters in Washington, D.C. All 3 had worked together at the Secret Service office located at 6 World Trade Center earlier in their careers. On 9/11, they were the senior special agents assigned close personal protection for President Bush, Vice President Cheney, and First Lady Laura Bush.
My name's Tony Zotto, and I was a special agent in charge of the Vice President's detail.
Nick Trotta, I was the assistant special agent in charge of the President's detail.
Eddie Morenzel, I was the primary supervisor for the Secret Service on Air Force One on 9/11.
You were in Florida that day.
I was.
We know how history sort of saw that day unfold, where an aide whispered into the president's ear.
Andy Card whispered to the president, "We're under attack." Another plane just went into the World Trade Center.
What was the first thing that went through your head in that moment?
We need to move the president. We figured that if we got on Air Force One and went up into the sky, that we would be able to hide in the sky. And the president was saying, "We're at war, and I need to be running this war from the Oval Office. I'm the commander in chief, and that's where I need to be."
And what did you think?
I thought, no, we can't do that. We can't take him into an unsettled area. I was again telling Secretary Card that we needed to go west, not go east. He was telling me that, the president isn't going to like that. So as we got up, Andy said, I want you to come with me when I go into the president's office. But you have to tell him that he's not going back to the White House now.
You have to tell the president that he's not going where he wants to be.
That's exactly right. And so I told him, we can't risk taking you there. And he said, that's where I want to go. And I said, our job is to protect you. If they get you, game over.
You said to the president, if they get you, game over?
Yeah.
Nick, walk me through your day.
We had made a decision and communicated that we're going to move the First Lady right here to this building.
The building where we are right now?
Correct. When I got here, the First Lady had just arrived.
What did the First Lady ask?
Where are the girls? What's going on? Barbara and Jenna. And then she was asking when could she speak to the president? She was very calm. And she was inquiring how our families were. It gets emotional because, we've got a job to do. And when workers would come in, she would ask, these agents and these administrative staff, is your family okay?
What do you remember most vividly from that day?
The initial call on the radio, inbound plane to the White House. Get him down, get him down.
About the vice president?
Yes. I just started running. I ran, the steps at the old EOB, how steep they are. I took those 4 at a time, ran into the office, he was gone. The VP was down below, and knowing that he had heart problems before, I wanted to make sure that, them running him down the stairs didn't, knock his ticker out of him.
He was okay.
Didn't look flushed or anything. He looked calm, cool. A military officer came in and he said, Mr. Vice President, there's a plane coming down the Potomac area direction from Pennsylvania. It's a hijacked plane. We need your authorization to take it down. And the VP said, is it a confirmed hijack? And the officer said, yes, sir, the FBI has confirmed it. He said, take it down. That was it.
What were those moments like in that room?
It was surreal. It was just something that you don't forget.
At the end of this day like none other, what did you guys say to each other?
See you tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Good job. See you tomorrow.
They showed up the next morning. They had said they had always been close, but that day solidified that they were brothers.
Peter, that was amazing. That was amazing accounts, and I'm wondering here if they had taken it down, how different this memorial would be today.
It was traumatic on Air Force One because I do know that the vice president gave the order. The president definitely confirmed it. And I was listening to the president who was talking to the vice president, and I heard him say, yes, they have permission to do that. When they hung up the phone, the president leaned forward and said to me, I can't believe, I was an Air National Guard pilot. I can't imagine receiving that order. And I was impressed that he had the empathy for those that might have to hear that order.
We just talked about this because my brother was an Air National Guard pilot. He did do those combat air patrols from the night of 9/11 for 6 months, and I remember him saying to me, if I had to shoot down a commercial jetliner, I hope I never get that order. I pray I will never get that order.
You would want to confirm, are you really giving me an order to do that? But beyond that, when the president did authorize it, and just minutes later, the crash came.
Let me just interrupt for a moment. 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. Now a moment of silence.
back here in New York, joined by Jenna and Andy Card. And Jenna, as we watched this unfold and we listened to the story before this, it mentioned your mom, and just the one thing she was thinking about was everybody else. And I just thought it just spoke to the unity.
I never saw myself before you looked at me, before you kissed my lips, before you smiled at me, and I knew that day I would never be alone. And it's the only way. Life never got me low, tears never broke me down. Inside I always know I'd be by your side, so I'd never be alone. But all that is different right now, and everything is solid but the ground. You'll never be alone. You'll never be alone. If you fall, I'll catch you. I won't ever let you be alone. I never want you to feel uncertainty. I listen to every word, believe every single dream. The world has a funny way of making you feel like you're alone. And when trials and troubles come, loved one, you know that your welfare is my concern. And if I'm far away, you know that I'll find my way back to your side. When the tide starts to roll and the wind starts to blow, when the thing you're afraid of is invisible, you'll never be alone. You'll never be alone. If you fall, I'll catch you. I won't ever let you be alone. If you fall, I'll catch you. I won't ever let you be alone. No, you'll never be alone.
That was Chris Jackson performing Never Alone. As we look at the Memorial Plaza here in New York City, one of three places where the 9/11 disaster being remembered today.
And from World Trade Center and Ground Zero, we moved to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where in a few moments we'll hear from former President Bush. And they are marking the 40 lives lost there, heroic lives who saved countless others with their quick action and their courage. I'm going to turn to Tom Yamas in the few moments we have before we listen to the president's speech. And Tom, we've been remarking all this morning about how brave and how quick thinking these passengers were, and how they saved this horrible tragedy from being even worse.
That's right, and as we wait for the former president to deliver his remarks, he may talk about the patriotism after 9/11, and it really started with a phrase from United Flight 93, "Let's roll." And I just wanted to give you guys the backstory of that phrase, because everyone knows it, but not everyone knows the story. Todd Beamer, who was a passenger aboard the flight, was speaking to an operator for about 15 minutes when he used that airphone, and he was talking to her. Her name was Lisa Jefferson, and he was explaining to her everything that had happened, and they were talking back and forth. They prayed. They actually prayed in Our Father. After that, because he was so close to his family and his faith, he recited Psalm 23, which is, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." After that, they keep talking. He tells Lisa Jefferson, this according to the book Among the Heroes, he said a few of the passengers were going to jump the hijacker with the bomb and try to regain control of the plane because the hijackers had a fake bomb. Are you sure you want to do that, Jefferson asked. At this point, I don't have much of a choice, Todd said. I'm going to have to go out on faith. What did she think, the operator? I stand behind you. Then Todd says this, you ready? Okay, let's roll. And with that phrase right there, I think he coined a term and a time, and with just 2 words, the power of the patriotism of the United States afterwards, right? And I wonder how many soldiers, how many Marines, how many sailors had those 2 words in their head as they went off to fight the war on terror. And one thing that everyone here stresses to me and to our entire team as we interview family members is that never forget, these were the first U.S. warriors in the war on terror. And when you hear that story and you hear the origin story of Let's Roll, you believe it. Guys, back to you.
Yeah, Tom, there were so many phone calls that were made from that airplane, and Flight 93 pushed back from the gate at Newark on time, but there was the runways were clogged, so they were delayed on the ground. Had they been on the ground a little longer, they might have seen what was happening here at the World Trade Center. But because they got into the air late and there had been so many communications that they were not only giving information, they were receiving information. Family members saying a plane just hit, the World Trade Center. So they understood that this was not a typical hijacking. This plane was meant to be turned into a weapon. And it certainly played a big role in their planning, knowing, what they were up against.
And even if you knew, would you have the courage? Could you summon the courage not only to go to your death, but to do it fighting? I can't imagine.
I have to tell you, Savannah, working on the Dateline that ran yesterday, a story I worked on yesterday about the voices of 9/11, the voicemails. This just takes you down. I mean, down these roads, and you keep asking yourself, what would I do? What would I do? What would I do? How brave these people are. Could I have that courage if I had 15 seconds in a voicemail to leave a message from my wife?
Right. What would you say?
I don't know what I'd say.
We want to listen in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Right now, we're hearing from Gordon Felt. He's the brother of Edward Porter Felt, and he's the president of the families of Flight 93. And he's speaking just moments before we expect to hear from former President Bush in the keynote address. So we'll listen in for a moment.
And here in the skies over southwestern Pennsylvania, a group of 40 individuals, mostly strangers, when becoming aware of what was taking place on the ground that morning, found the courage to band together at a moment's notice. Without regard for political, religious, professional, or cultural differences, our 40, under extreme conditions, were able to change the course of history, averting the potential of our final image that fateful day being the Capitol dome, collapsed and on fire, the greatest symbol of our democracy in ruins. As the personification of that symbol, our heroes embraced the tenets of democracy that no expression of terrorism will ever extinguish. E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. Our heroes united. They formulated a plan when confronted by a great evil. They prayed. They voted on a course of action, and then they struck. Though in the process they lost their lives, there is no question that they won the first battle in this current war on terrorism. 35 minutes, 9:28 to 10:03 a.m. From the initial terrorist attack on Flight 93 until the moment the plane came down on our sacred ground. A lifetime, a moment, forever, yesterday. Here on the ground, first responders, aware of what was taking place in New York, at the Pentagon, and in the midst of fear and uncertainty, instinctively reacted to the horror that was brought to their rural community in a way that has forever altered their lives. These proud men and women of Somerset County and the surrounding region demonstrated everything that is awesome about the United States of America. terrorism met rural America, proud, strong, determined. The relationship our families and our nation has forged with this local community is extraordinary. To our extended family here in the Somerset County region, you will forever have our complete gratitude. You have embraced us and the story of our loved ones in a selfless, fiercely protective fashion, even as you continue to move forward, carrying the pain and anguish thrust upon your community 20 years ago. Recently, I was listening to former Congressman Trey Gowdy discussing the ultimate sacrifices made by our men and women in uniform. During his remarks, I was struck by a common theme that I did not recall highlighted in prior years. It was a theme that I felt strongly was consistent with the story of the heroes of Flight 93 and all those we lost on September 11th. I experienced a moment of clarity that brought my understanding of heroism and of sacrifice to an uncomfortable reality, moving me to question who we are as a society. What struck such a nerve was not the annual reminder to honor and remember the thousands of lives ripped from the embrace of their families the morning of September 11th, 2001, including the 40 heroes of Flight 93. But rather the question to be considered is, are we worthy of their sacrifice? Are we worthy? Do we as individuals, communities, and as a country conduct ourselves in a manner that would make those that sacrificed so much and fought so hard on September 11th proud of who we have become? Do we share the same willingness to sacrifice for others in little ways as well as large? To act when necessary for no other reason than to accomplish a noble goal, egoless, and with no other motivation than to do what is right? Do we cherish the hard-earned freedoms that we enjoy, secured every generation by those willing to stand toe-to-toe with anyone or any country willing to steal them away? The real question that we must all ask ourselves is, have we as a society moved on and left the hard-earned lessons of September 11th behind? Have we become desensitized to what really happened that fateful morning? Have we diminished the courageous actions of these brave men and women, these heroes we honor today at the Flight 93 National Memorial, as well as those in New York City and at the Pentagon, by relegating their stories to the history books? As a country, we shouldn't seek to move on, but rather let us dedicate ourselves to moving forward, honoring and remembering the sacrifices made on September 11th, the lessons we learned, remembering the names, the individuals, and the collective actions of so many that day. Let us be worthy of the selfless sacrifices that were made. Let us remember who we became on September 12th. In the aftermath of September 11th, we saw beyond our differences so that in unity we could survive the devastation of the day. E pluribus unum. Out of many, we became one. That is the inspiration of September 11th. Whether it was in the air or on the ground that morning, heroism was revealed. History was made, and the course of our lives were changed forever. The path we follow is up to us. Let us strive to be worthy of those we lost that morning, our 40 heroes, our loved ones, and the thousands of other innocent lives extinguished that day and in the aftermath of September 11th. E pluribus unum. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordy. An enduring moment in the days after September 11th occurred when President George W. Bush used a bullhorn to speak to firefighters at Ground Zero in New York. His words provided sorely needed encouragement to a grieving country. A common thread of heroism running through each of the 3 attack sites on September 11th was the devotion to duty shown by our first responders. They made the nation proud then, and they continue to do that now. Thank you to all of our first responders across these great United States, for we are truly grateful for your service. I'm greatly honored now to present our next speaker, the 43rd President of the United States of America, George W. Bush. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Accompanying him today is First Lady Laura Bush, who occupies a special place in the hearts and families of Flight 93. For on September 17th, Mrs. Bush traveled here to offer her condolences and to those of America to the families and passengers of Flight 93. President Bush is fondly remembered by everyone involved in the effort to commemorate the heroes of Flight 93 for signing the act that created this national memorial on September 24th, 2002. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Laura and I are honored to be with you. Madam Vice President, Vice President Cheney, Governor Wolf, Secretary Holland, and distinguished guests. 20 years ago, we all found in different ways, in different places, but all at the same moment, that our lives would be changed forever. The world was loud with carnage and sirens, and then quiet with missing voices that would never be heard again. These lives remain precious to our country and infinitely precious to many of you. Today we remember your loss, we share your sorrow, and we honor the men and women you have loved so long and so well. For those too young to recall that clear September day, it is hard to describe the mix of feelings we experienced. There was horror at the scale of destruction, and awe at the bravery and kindness that rose to meet it. There was shock at the audacity of evil, and gratitude for the heroism and decency that opposed it. In the sacrifice of the first responders, in the mutual aid of strangers, in the solidarity of grief and grace, the actions of an enemy revealed the spirit of a people, and we were proud of our wounded nation. In these memories, the passengers and crew of Flight 93 must always have an honored place. Here, the intended targets became the instruments of rescue, and many who are now alive owe a vast, unconscious debt to the defiance displayed in the skies above this field. It would be a mistake to idealize the experience of those terrible events. All that many people could initially see was the brute randomness of death. All that many could feel was unearned suffering. All that many could hear was God's terrible silence. There are many who still struggle with a lonely pain that cuts deep within. In those fateful hours, we learned other lessons as well. We saw that Americans were vulnerable, but not fragile. That they possess a core of strength that survives the worst that life can bring. We learned that bravery is more common than we imagined, emerging with sudden splendor in the face of death. We vividly felt how every hour with our loved ones was a temporary and holy gift. And we found that even the longest days end. Many of us have tried to make spiritual sense of these events. There is no simple explanation for the mix of providence and human will that sets the direction of our lives. But comfort can come from a different sort of knowledge. After wandering long and lost in the dark, many have found they were actually walking step by step toward grace. As a nation, our adjustments have been profound. Many Americans struggled to understand why an enemy would hate us with such zeal. The security measures incorporated into our lives are both sources of comfort and reminders of our vulnerability. And we have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdain for pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit, and it is our continuing duty to confront them. After 9/11, millions of brave Americans stepped forward and volunteered to serve in the armed forces. The military measures taken over the last 20 years to pursue dangers at their source have led to debate. But one thing is certain. We owe an assurance to all who have fought our nation's most recent battles. Let me speak directly to veterans and people in uniform. The cause you pursued at the call of duty is the noblest America has to offer. You have shielded your fellow citizens from danger. You have defended the beliefs of your country and advanced the rights of the downtrodden. You have been the face of hope and mercy in dark places. You have been a force for good in the world. Nothing that has followed, nothing, can tarnish your honor or diminish your accomplishments. To you and to the honored dead, our country is forever grateful. In the weeks and months following the 9/11 attacks, I was proud to lead an amazing, resilient, united people. When it comes to the unity of America, those days seem distant from our own. Malign force seems at work in our common life that turns every disagreement into an argument and every argument into a clash of cultures. So much of our politics has become a naked appeal to anger, fear, and resentment. That leaves us worried about our nation and our future together. I come without explanations or solutions. I can only tell you what I've seen. On America's day of trial and grief, I saw millions of people instinctively grab for a neighbor's hand and rally to the cause of one another. That is the America I know. At a time when religious bigotry might have flowed freely, I saw Americans reject prejudice and embrace people of Muslim faith. That is the nation I know. At a time when nativism could have stirred hatred and violence against people perceived as outsiders, I saw Americans reaffirm their welcome to immigrants and refugees. That is the nation I know. At a time when some viewed the rising generation as individualistic and decadent, I saw young people embrace an ethic of service and rise to selfless action. That is the nation I know. This is not mere nostalgia. It is the truest version of ourselves. It is what we have been and what we can be again. 20 years ago, terrorists chose a random group of Americans on a routine flight to be collateral damage in a spectacular act of terror. The 33 passengers and 7 crew of Flight 93 could have been any group of citizens selected by fate. In a sense, they stood in for us all. The terrorists soon discovered that a random group of Americans is an exceptional group of people facing an impossible circumstance. They comforted their loved ones by phone, braced each other for action, and defeated the designs of evil. These Americans were brave, strong, and united in ways that shocked the terrorists, but should not surprise any of us. This is the nation we know. And whenever we need hope and inspiration, we can look to the skies and remember. God bless.
An emotional President Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, who was Commander-in-Chief on that fateful day, 9/11/2001, and we're honored to be in the presence of 2 people who know him well in different contexts: Jenna Bush Hager, his daughter, and Andy Card, former White House Chief of Staff, on that day. Andy, as I listen to this, first of all, we see the former president get misty there, but also it does feel like this might be the sum total of something he's wanted to say for a long, long time.
This was quintessential, compassionate, conservative George Bush, who is a patriot and empowers other patriots. It was a very emotional speech to me. It was a necessary speech. It wasn't just for this day. It was actually pointing to tomorrow.
Yeah, that was so striking.
I was very impressed with it.
I like the "This is the America I know," that refrain. Every time he said it, I was just nodding my head and feeling that. As Savannah was saying, it's something you feel like he's wanted to say that for a long time. It felt like a little tough love he was trying to impart there, Andy.
Well, you know, he is a very respectful former president who doesn't want to get into the fray of second-guessing presidents. He didn't like it when he was second-guessed by presidents, so he's very disciplined about not doing that. But that was the George Bush that I know and love, and it was sincere.
You know, I'm his daughter. I look at him, and one time Barbara and I wrote a letter to Malia and Sasha, and we said just that. People will criticize your dad. People will debate him on politics. I don't pay attention to that because he's my father. You know, that's who he is to me. And I can tell you that I know he practiced that speech because my sister said he read it to her over and over again. And I know that he probably didn't want to cry because it was supposed to uplift the people that were there who lost people they love so much. But I bet he just couldn't help it. He just couldn't help it.
We continue to watch this ceremony unfold at the Pentagon. We expect to hear from the Vice President Kamala Harris in just a moment, and we're going to have a musical interlude here. And we'll listen in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Colonel. At this time, I am proud to welcome the Secretary of the United States Department of the Interior, Deb Haaland, the 54th person entrusted with that responsibility. She leads a department which employs more than 70,000 people, whose mission it is to protect and manage.
Again, expecting Vice President Harris to speak in a few months. Let's bring back Michael Beschloss now, NBC contributor and presidential historian. Michael, what were your thoughts on President Bush's remarks?
Secretary.
That speech was a blockbuster. I mean, it was not only a lovely speech and not only something that came directly from his heart, and I can understand exactly what Jenna said about how he rehearsed it and tried not to cry, and in the end did not succeed, because he really meant it. And, you know, above and beyond that, Lester and Hoda and Savannah and Jenna, here's a day where a former president of the United States has basically just rebuked the majority of the party, the Republican Party, that twice nominated him for president, because many of the things that he was denouncing are things that are now beliefs in the Republican Party that are a majority that voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020 when Trump lost, and even included some people who attacked the Capitol and the Congress on the 6th of January of this year. You know, it's like the person who once said, you live long enough, you get to see everything. You never would have imagined, or at least I wouldn't, that we would get to a day where George W. Bush would feel so strongly about what's happened to his party and what's happened to his country that he would say this on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. This is a speech that will be remembered and read and should be taken to heart.
Yeah, certainly a speech that dipped into the past, but was very present in terms of the environment.
In fairness, Michael, we'll let you do. That's a bit of analysis, because I'm sure, as I look at Andy Carter's former White House Chief of Staff, never off duty, are you? Certainly a rebuke for politics. No question, whether he didn't single out Republicans or Democrats, but he did have tough words for the way politics is conducted in this country in 2021.
I think he was calling us to a higher position of respect in our democracy. I don't view that as chastising. I think that he was really kind of being a leader and a conscience. He's introduced a new conscience to us. Think about what you're saying. Think about what you're doing. Can't we be better people? Aren't we better than that? And he was always for that. He was looking for us to be better than.
It seems like unity has been the theme today. I was just thinking about that invocation we heard, and it was like everybody come together. And you can view it as political or not political, but when I was listening, I was nodding my head thinking, can't we all just get along? I mean, it's a perfect day to remember what it was like, and also a perfect day to come together. And Michael, I mean, look, you're a student of history. You know how things can unfold. I mean, can you actually foresee a time where we all finally sort of get back together, sit at the table, hold hands, sing songs?
I would love nothing better, and I know that you would feel the same way. I'm not so sure it's going to happen, because this was just 20 years ago. You know, toxic political environment, Al Gore had just run against George W. Bush, you know, very contested election. Yet, despite all of that, 9/11 happens, and the country unites, and the loser, Al Gore, gives a speech saying, I support George W. Bush, he's my president. That's the way it has been for most of American history. In unity, there is a strength. I think, sadly, there's considerable reason to think that what President Bush said today is absolutely right, that we have strayed much too far from our origins, which are to include and to unify. When President Bush was talking about, for instance, people who turn their back on refugees and immigrants, he was not talking about the Democratic Party.
And we're looking at a split screen there, the World Trade Center, the reading of the names continuing, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, Vice President Harris has just been introduced and taking the podium.
Good morning. Good morning. President Bush, it is my honor to be on this stage with you and Mrs. Laura Bush, and thank you, President Bush, for your words. They are as resonant today as the words you spoke 20 years ago. Governor Tom Wolf, Superintendent Stephen Clark, Madam Secretary, and the President of the Families of Flight 93, Gordon Felt. It is truly an honor to be with all of you at this field of honor. We are joined today, of course, by the family and friends of the 40 passengers and crew members of Flight 93. And we stand today with all those who lost someone on September 11th, 2001, and in the aftermath of the attacks. So many in our nation, too many in our nation, have deeply felt the passage of time these last 20 years. Every birthday your loved one missed, every holiday, every time her favorite team won or his favorite song came on the radio, every time you've tucked in your children or dropped them off at college, you have felt every day, every week, and every year that has passed these 20 years. So please know your nation sees you, and we stand with you, and we support you. We are gathered today on hallowed ground, at this place that has been sanctified by sacrifice, to honor the heroism that the 40 passengers and crew members showed in the face of grave terrorism. I remember when I first learned about what happened on that fateful flight. What happened on Flight 93 told us then, and it still tells us, so much about the courage of those on board who gave everything they possibly could, about the resolve of the first responders who risked everything, and about the resilience of the American people. On this 20th anniversary, on this solemn day of remembrance, we must challenge ourselves, yes, to look back, to remember, for the sake of our children, for the sake of their children. And for that reason, we must also look forward. We must also look toward the future. Because in the end, I do believe that is what the 40 were fighting for. Their future and ours. On the days that followed, September 11th, 2001, we were all reminded that unity is possible in America. We were reminded also that unity is imperative in America. It is essential to our shared prosperity, to our national security, and to our standing in the world. And by unity, I don't mean uniformity. We had differences of opinion in 2001, as we do in 2021. And I believe that in America, our diversity is our strength. At the same time, we saw after 9/11 how fear can be used to sow division in our nation. As Sikh and Muslim Americans were targeted because of how they looked or how they worshiped. But we also saw what happens when so many Americans, in the spirit of our nation, stand in solidarity with all people and their fellow American, with those who experience violence and discrimination, when we stand together. And looking back, we remember the vast majority of Americans were unified in purpose to help families heal, to help communities recover, to defend our nation, and to keep us safe. In a time of outright terror, we turned toward each other. In the face of a stranger, we saw a neighbor and a friend. That time reminded us the significance and the strength of our unity as Americans, and that it is possible in America. So, moments from now, we will leave this hallowed place, still carrying with us the pain of this loss, this tremendous loss. And still, the future will continue to unfold. We will face new challenges, challenges that we could not have seen 20 years ago. We will seize opportunities that were at one time unimaginable. And we know that what lies ahead is not certain. It is never certain. It has never been. But I know this: if we do the hard work of working together as Americans, if we remain united in purpose, we will be prepared for whatever comes next. The 40 passengers and crew members of Flight 93, as we all know, they didn't know each other. Most of them didn't know each other. They were different people from different places. They were on that particular flight for different reasons. But they did not focus on what may separate us. No, they focused on what we all share, on the humanity we all share. In a matter of minutes, in the most dire of circumstances, the 40 responded as one. They fought for their own lives and to save the lives of countless others at our nation's capital. After today, it is my hope and prayer that we continue to honor their courage, their conviction, with our own, that we honor their unity by strengthening our common bonds, by strengthening our global partnerships, and by always living out our highest ideals. This work will not be easy. It never has been. And it will take all of us believing in who we are as a nation. And it will take all of us going forth to work together. Thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless America. Thank you.
Vice President Kamala Harris wrapping up her remarks at the memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Again, as so many have remarked today, speaking to the unity of the American people and the potential for further unity, but certainly paying tribute to those who lost their lives, the heroes of Flight 93, that plane crashing in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the terrorists unsuccessful in getting it to its intended target in Washington.
Let's bring it back here to New York, and let's turn to Rahima Ellis. She's been following what's been a very, very emotional day right here in New York City. Hey, Rahima.
Hey there, Hoda. It is a tradition here in New York that happens now every year for the last 20 years since 9/11, of families coming together and remembering their loved ones, reminding themselves of what they don't have anymore. And that makes this a very painful experience for people. They were pleased that the President Biden and Dr. Joe Biden came here, as was the case for former presidents Obama and Clinton. But it's notable that none of them spoke. And in part, I think it's out of reverence to the families, just to hear what is the tradition. And that is what's happening now. The reading of nearly 3,000 names of those who lost their lives here 20 years ago. And to indicate the magnitude of this, it takes hours to read nearly 3,000 names. But people are doing it in part because they say this is an opportunity for them to do what they promised some 20 years ago. And when they made a vow to never forget. Hoda?
Rahima Ellis. Rahima, thank you so much.
Rahima, one of the many correspondents for NBC News who was right here at the feet of the World Trade Center on those very moments on that day. And no company was hit harder on 9/11 than Cantor Fitzgerald. 658 people, employees of that firm, died in the North Tower. Howard Lutnick is the CEO and chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald, and you, along with your sister Edie, have spent the last 20 years rebuilding this company and keeping faith with the families who lost loved ones that day. You among them. You lost your brother. How are you feeling as we sit here and this beautiful September day that reminds us of that day.
I can't stop having goosebumps. You know, when they rang the bell of when the first plane hit, you know, I immediately looked to the sky, you know, and just thought of all my friends. There's 658 people, and people don't really think about how much they love the people they work with. I mean, you guys sit next to each other. I don't think you think that you love each other, but you know what? If you were all ripped apart, your insides would shred. And that's what happened to us. So we had a crazy policy at our firm. We only wanted to hire people that we liked. You know, so everybody hired their friends. So think about how rough that made it.
What do you remember most of that day?
Well, I took my son to his first day at kindergarten. You know, that's what I was doing. So I'm alive because it was his first day, and we took that little picture, you know, with his little wet behind the ears,
It's those
his little
moments
backpack.
of those moments of fate.
So I was.
Really drive the
that's
day.
where I was.
Yeah.
And then they told me a plane had hit the building, and I thought it was like a little Piper Cub, some idiot sort of touch it. I didn't see a picture of it, and I came right down to the building, and I was grabbing people as they came out, you know, asking what floor they were on, hoping that. You know, there were a lot of doors to the Trade Center, so I was just hoping someone from my floors came out that door, because they would have come out all the doors. And the highest was the 92nd floor, and then I heard this loudest sound I'd ever heard, and I started running. I didn't know what I was running from. And then you all saw that black cloud. I mean, think about it. I was standing there.
Wow.
And it just overwhelmed me, this sort of wild black cloud.
You're talking about when the second tower comes down.
No, when the first tower came down, I was there, you know, grabbing people, and, you know, I just ran the right way. If I'd run the other way, I'd have gotten killed. So I was just, you know, think about it. Someone said, "Oh, don't you feel lucky?" And I'm like, I don't know. If the bullet misses my head and hits all my friends, you know.
I was wondering about that sort of survivor's guilt, because you had so many good friends, your brother, you know, others who passed, and I just wondered what that's like and how you deal with that.
Well, first off, it's huge, survivor's guilt. But what I did is I tried to turn it into, you know, what could I do?
Yeah.
Right? So these families, 658 families, there's no donation that I could make that would make a darn bit of difference if you divide by 658. So we had to rebuild the company. And so here was the idea. I said to all our employees, we had a call. And I said, look, the people who are alive, we can either go to our friends' funerals, 20 funerals a day for 35 straight days. I mean, just pulverizing. Some, you know, brothers, we had a pair of sisters die. I mean, you go to that funeral, it's just, your insides are finished. Or we're gonna work harder than we've ever worked before, but the only reason to do it is to take care of those families, because God knows, I don't wanna go to work. Imagine going to work. Ugh. So everybody agreed to give 25% of their salary, of their pay, like literally of their pay, and then we'd hire new people and say, look, I'd love to hire you for $200,000, but here's the way it's gonna work. You've got to agree to take $150,000, and we're going to send $50,000 to the families. Wow. And so because of that, you know, people wonder, how were you able to give the families $180 million? We didn't earn profits like that. This was the souls of the incredible people who joined Cantor Fitzgerald. I mean, think of how incredible they are. A new person joins the firm and gives 25% of their pay to these families. So that's why I'm the proudest CEO. I mean, you could think of like, you know, people say, oh, you did wonderful things. No, I stood on the most incredible employees' shoulders. And they helped stitch together my insides and give me my life back.
It's an incredible journey you have been on. And
Howard, that was beautiful. Yeah. It was beautiful.
Well, our hearts are with you and the families today. I know you're about to go speak and be with them and share lunch and wrap your arms around them as you have in every year since and every day. Thank you for your time and your memories on a really hard day.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Howard.
it.
We really
These are beautiful families, and I appreciate you guys doing
Thank
this.
you.
You know, the never forget line, you know, they just want to make sure that people know how difficult this was.
Well, we're going to have to sign off for now. Of course, full coverage on MSNBC. I'll see you tonight on NBC Nightly News. Good day from New York.